Okay, we have a lot to cover in this one today. So I will probably, this is part D of Meet Ephraim, and it's chock full. And we're going to go ahead and probably break it up into like D1, D2, D3, because there's a lot here. And I don't want to miss anything. I don't want to rush too fast. Although we're going to skip a lot. We're going to get to the juice and keep it moving. And I don't want to really forget anything, and I don't have many notes, but I'll do the best I can. So we were talking about our sons of Jacob who become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, even that statement is an oversimplification because the 12 sons of Jacob aren't really the 12 tribes of Israel. And you're going to see what I mean when we get there. It gets, like I said, this is a very dysfunctional family. Stay with me. But as we said last time, Jacob was the first to father all Hebrew sons. And we talked about what that meant. So let's take a look at some of them today. All right. We already spoke about Benjamin last time. So I kind of crossed him out. The next ones I want to talk about just really quickly and make sure it's clear, Simeon and Levi. I put them up here in white. And those two guys don't, eventually, we're going to see today, Jacob is going to bless his sons with portions of land. Okay, we're going to get there. But two tribes don't get land. Okay. Levi doesn't get land because Levi is going to end up being the priesthood, okay, the tribe that does the priestly duties in the temples and whatnot. So they kind of have to be everywhere. So Levi doesn't get their own land. They just get cities within everybody else's land, if that makes sense. So Levi doesn't have a territory of their own. And that's because they're scattered all through the tribes because they're the family of priests. Okay, easy enough. But Simeon's not getting land either. And Simeon was a douchebag, and he did a horrid attack and violence and revenge and yada, yada, yada. It's a long story. But because of Simeon's abject violence in a revenge attack, and he did some cruelty to animals, excessive violence, and forced circumcision on people, which is interesting. Put a pin in that. He doesn't get land. So Simeon kind of has to wander, right? His descendants have to kind of wander around the tribes. But interestingly enough, you're going to find out a little about this Judah character today, too. And Judah was wicked, you guys. Judah wasn't nice. But Simeon was even more wicked. And interestingly enough, well, I mean, that's kind of debatable, actually. But Simeon was wicked enough not to get land. And he ends up being assimilated into Judah. Because he helped Judah in a war. And then so Judah's like, look, we'll give you this part of land, you know, kind of on the outskirts of Judah. And so Simeon just got absorbed. Simeon, in all his violence, animal cruelty, and forced circumcision, just happened to get absorbed into Judah. Okay? So Simeon becomes, for all intents and purposes, part of Judah. All right. So he doesn't, and he kind of gets his own land, like you'll see. Some Bible maps out there that show land of Simeon, but he doesn't actually get that land granted to him, except later on by Judah. It's like, look, dude, you helped us out, and your violence paid off for us in war, so we'll let you settle in our land. So they had a place to settle within Judah. All right, good enough, right? Cutting a check for 15% and keep it moving. But today, the three that I really want to look at are Reuben, Judah, and Joseph. And let's get down to brass tacks on these gentlemen. Now, this guy, this is who I chose, Humphrey Bogart, to play our character, excuse me, of Joseph. And basically, because, Humphrey Bogart made the trench coat famous and part of popular culture. He's like the first trench coat guy. If you're an old movie buff, you'll recognize that Humphrey Bogart trench coat. Well, Joseph also had an amazing coat that we'll see. So I'm associating the coat part of Joseph here. And we're just going to pop over and share this tab instead. Okay. And we remember that Joseph was the favorite, right? The favorite son of Jacob, who, because he was the first son, the monogenes, between Jacob and Rachel, right? And Rachel died on the road and giving birth to Benjamin. We went through all of that, and she got buried on the side of the road on the way to a place called Ephraim, which is near Bethlehem, which is in what eventually will become the land of Judah. Are we good? Okay, we're good. So Joseph's our favorite here. He lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan, and these are the generations of Jacob. Now, where was his father's sojournings? Do we remember? The cities that should stick out to you are Bethel, Shiloh, all of these places in the north that we talked about 100 times. All right. Now, Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy. With the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought a bad report of them to their father. So Joseph tattles on the boys. Now, Jacob loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was a son of his old age. And I would argue he was the monogenes, the firstborn, the uniquely born, the only born between he and Rachel until good old Benjamin comes along. So Jacob Israel made him a robe of many colors. And you can go and watch Donny Osmond in like the 70s. He did a little musical called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Well, that's where this comes from, which is why, again, I chose Humphrey Bogart. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now, Joseph had a dream, and when he told this to his brothers, they hated him even more. Well, I wonder what this dream was. Joseph was a dreamer and a visionary and a prophet. Okay, so he said to them, hear this dream that I've dreamed. We are binding sheaves in the field, and my sheaf arose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf of wheat. So he's seeing these wheat bowing down to him. And his brother says, are you to reign over us? Are you to rule over us? And they hated him even more for his dreams and his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, behold, I've dreamed another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you're dreaming? Am I and your mother and your brothers going to come and bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept this saying in mind. So he's having prophetic dreams about him ruling over his brothers. I hated him so much. Joseph is about to be sold by his brothers. Okay, here we go. His brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. Shechem is an area that is north of Shiloh. Okay, northern county in Shiloh in the north. And Jacob, or Israel, said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I'm going to send you to them. And he says, well, here I am. And he said, go see if it is well with your brothers of the flock and bring me word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. Now, the valley of Hebron is south of Jerusalem. I'm wondering why they're in the valley of Hebron, but we're not going to question that right now. So he walked about 50 fucking miles and came to Shechem. So this is a several-day journey, which doesn't really add up, but nevertheless. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked, what are you seeking? He said, I'm seeking my brothers. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock. And the man said, they've gone away, for I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Now, Dothan is north of Shechem, which is north of even Shiloh. See if I can find a map for you. So this is, I'm not saying it's not accurate or it is accurate or what's happening here. I didn't go deep here. But the truth of the matter is Hebron is kind of far from Shechem. And let me show that to you right now. Let's see. We're going to Bible study with Randy. Share this tab instead. Okay. You can see this map. All right. We've got Hebron way down here. Okay. And then we've got Jerusalem. Bethlehem would be right down here below Jerusalem. We've got Mount Ephraim. We've got Shechem. And we've got Mount Ebal. Now, Shiloh is right around here near Mount Ephraim. Okay. So, like, they're going a long-ass way all the way up to here. And then Dothan is even more north of that. Let's see if we can get another map that shows all of these for you. Here's a good one. Share this tab instead. Okay, Pinterest, do me good. All right, so here you see Samaria, Dothan, Shechem, Bethel, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, all the way down in a line. So supposedly he's walking all the way from Hebron, all the way to Shechem, and then all the way to Dothan for these sheep. And that just seems like a really long trek. Let's see how far. How far is Shechem to Hebron? 112 kilometers. So driving, it's 3 hours and 18 minutes. And there you go. Or 48 miles. So just like I said, it's about 50 miles. That seems a lot. Just saying. But we're not gonna argue about that right now. Let's go back and show this tab instead. Where were we? So we're just going to keep on rolling. He found them at Dothan, which is in the north, and they saw him from afar. And before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. So Joseph, the favorite, the only monogenes, or the firstborn, the monogenes until Benjamin, who Rachel died in childbirth and was buried along the roadside on the way to Ephraim, which is a portion of Bethlehem, was the favorite son, Joseph. And it's important to remember that Leah was the daughter he had to marry but didn't want to marry, and Rachel was like his love. Okay, so him being the first son of Rachel is a big deal. He's the favorite. And all the other brothers are conspiring to kill him. Now, Benjamin would be too young, so he's not involved in this. So this is the other older brothers from all of the different wives. All right, and they said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into a pit. Then we'll say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Take note of this. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued them out of their hands, saying, no, let's not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood. Just throw him into the pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. And Reuben said this to kind of fool the brothers. And so he would go and rescue him to restore him to his father. So Reuben's like, let's not kill him. throw him in the pit. And then Reuben's thinking, after you guys aren't looking, I'll get him out of the pit and take him back to dad. So Reuben kind of saved his life, convinced him to just put him in the pit. And then Reuben was going to double back and save him when his brothers weren't around looking. Because, I guess Reuben doesn't want to get killed too. Okay. Reuben ends up with land. He doesn't actually get land in Israel. He chooses, centuries later, way later, when they're getting their land and they're going into the land of Israel, from the crossing over the Moses thing, he chooses his tribe, his descendants, choose to stay on the side of the land. Let me show you, actually. Share this tab instead. All right. They cross over the Jordan River right about down here. Like, look where Mount Ephraim is in the middle. Kind of there when they're coming across. I think I actually have it on my slide deck. Let me see. Let's see if yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Okay, here it is. Share this tab instead. All right. They're when they come across, they're going to move across this way, right? And they're going to land right over here in Gilgal, right near Bethel and Shiloh. And this is sort of their meeting places. Well, you can see this land belongs to Gad. Gad is one of the tribes that decided not to take land across the Jordan River. Well, the other one is Reuben. Reuben also decides not to take land across the Jordan River. So that's important to remember, because Reuben kind of ends up being where Jordan is today. So, your Reubenites would be sort of Jordanians today. Okay. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe that many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. So basically they dumped him in an empty well. They sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to Egypt. Now, Ishmael, does anybody remember who Ishmael is? Ishmael is a son of Abraham. Okay, a couple generations ago, Abraham had several sons. Should we remember? Let's go back and remember. Let's go back and remember. Share this tab instead. Okay, Abraham. Remember, Abraham had Isaac. Isaac was his monogenes. Why was Isaac the monogenes, even though he had 8 sons? Because Isaac was the only son between Abraham and Sarah. But Abraham had other sons, right? Remember, he had other sons. And one of those other sons of Abraham, who wasn't Isaac, the monogenes, the Hebrew, was Ishmael. Okay? So Ishmael is a distant cousin, if you will, of these guys. All right. Share this tab instead. The Ishmaelites end up actually becoming the Arab nation. So basically, he saw a caravan of Arabs who were descendants from Abraham, but were not Hebrew, right? Because they were from a different life. So distant cousins, the Arabs, come rolling along with their camels. And then, Judah, of all brothers, Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it? What profit? Weird that Judah's already thinking about the monies. But what profit is it if we kill our brother and then conceal his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. We're going to sell him to the Arabs. And let not our hand be upon him. Because he's our brother. He's our own flesh. So we can't kill him, but we can make money off him and sell him to the Arabs." This is really funny when you learn who owned all of the, I'm not sharing this tab instead. When you learn who owned all the slave ships, it's just really funny to like make these connections, just say. But okay, looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites or Arabs coming from Gilead, their camels bearing gum, balm, myrrh, and Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Let's sell him to the Arabs, the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened. Then the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph into captivity into Egypt. All right. So Judah sells him for 20 pieces of silver. There's a lot going on here with Judah. So I tell you, Judah was wicked. Judah sold his brother Joseph. So the South sold out the North. This has parallels in the New Testament when you realize that the apostle of Jesus that was from Judah was the guy who sold them out for pieces of silver and sold Jesus to the authorities for silver. That guy's name is Judas. And Judas from Judah is the traitor of the apostles who sold Jesus. Now, maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe it's just a coincidence that Joseph, who happens to be the name of Jesus's father, was sold from the North, was sold by his brother Judah into captivity for a few pieces of silver. Do you see any parallels here? Yet we're supposed to believe that the Messiah is from the tribe of Judah. Does that sound right to you? That this, because what you have to understand about biblical text is nobody reads the Old Testament, but the entire Bible is set upon these legends, stories, oral traditions, history, whatever you want to call it, of the patriarchs. And each tribe has its own blessing, curses, and personality. So, I remember in New Orleans, it's a really weird culture in New Orleans, and everyone knows who's from there, what high school you went to, because just the way the culture is set up, right? Everything's about your high school, because there's 30 of them, and there's a lot of private schools, and there's a lot of charter schools, and it's just like everyone, you can basically live anywhere and go to any school. Okay, you don't attend school based on your address necessarily. It's a very open enrollment kind of place. So one of the things the kids always ask, in their 20s at a bar, they'll roll up and say, "Oh, what high school did you go to?" It's just a thing, and everybody knows, and it's a certain culture, personality, and it says something about you. Well, the same with Hebrew tribes, but deeper. Okay, your reputation comes from the personality, characteristics, and actions of the brothers of the patriarchs. Okay, it's sort of like, the personality and the character traits are baked into the tribe. So later on, right, when something happens, this is why they're always mentioning your tribal affiliation when you do something. Okay, so if it's really violent, it's like, oh yeah, they were from Simeon, right? Benjamin divides the spoil. So Benjamin comes in like a ravenous wolf, stalks his prey, and then divides the people. So when you see Saul of Tarsus, or the Saul that ran around with David, it fits the personality of the tribe to be duplicitous and divisive. Does that make sense? So it's just this characteristic that carries through the lineage. You can't just throw that out in the New Testament. That's not how it works. So we're seeing the Judas selling Joseph's son in the New Testament, Jesus, to for silver. There's a parallel there that you can't get around, but people want to ignore this. They want to throw it out, these personalities of the tribes. That's why I say he can't be from Judah. Judah is duplicitous and wicked, and he remains that way all through the fucking Bible until suddenly Jesus comes along and like he's a good guy from Judah. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any fucking sense. But we're just going to put a pin in that and know that these tribal personality traits carry through the whole Bible, and that's why they have tribes. Okay? All right. Now, Reuben returned, but that's not proof, but we're getting to proof. That's just something to understand about how the Bible's constructed. Now, when Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes. So Reuben wasn't part of this selling. Okay. Reuben was the Arab dude who wanted to step in to help his brother. So the Arab dude wasn't around. And I'm calling him an Arab dude, not because he's an Israelite, but because he has that land on the other side of the Jordan River. So he would be a Jordanian dude. Okay. A dude from Jordan. And not part of the land in Israel proper that we would think of today. He's on the outskirts of that in the Arab lands. So Reuben wasn't part of this sale. He came back, he doubled back to rescue Joseph. And he said, oh, shit, Joseph's not here. And he tore his clothes. Tearing your clothes means you're in mourning. You're freaking the fuck out. That's just a signal of mourning. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy's gone. Where shall I go? And then they took Joseph's robe, because they took his coat from him, remember? Slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. I want you to simmer on that. I want you to do you find there to be any metaphorical symbolism in that? In dipping Joseph's robe in blood from a slaughtered animal. And a slaughtered goat, of all things. Just asking. And they sent the robe. You got to get metaphor, guys. This is lyrics. This is poetry. There's so much metaphor and characterization and foreshadowing baked into the Bible. It's crazy. Like you could stop and do a sermon on every line. It's really deep. But when people aren't making these connections, they don't understand why it's here. All right. They sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we found. Identify if this is the robe of your son or not. And Jacob, the father, identified it and said, it is my son's robe. Oh my gosh, a fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without a doubt torn to pieces. So they lied to the father, poured dead animal blood on his coat after they sold him to the Arabs for some silver, because that was Judah's idea. And Simeon, the Arab, couldn't say them. Oh, dear God. And told Jacob, the patriarch, lied to him and said he was dead, the favorite son. So Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth and mourned for his son for many days. So this is a way of mourning. They would put on, mourning clothes, basically. And all his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Sheol is the land of the dead, right? It's not hell. It's just the holding place for sleeping souls. We've talked about that before. All right. His father wept for him. And meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So he's in the house of Pharaoh. And that is the story of Joseph. Now, a bunch of shit happens. Okay? A bunch of shit happens. Judah the perv. Well, let's talk a little bit about Judah the perv. Judah goes on and saw the daughter of a Canaanite and took her and banged her, and she had a son. And she had several sons, blah, 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 blah. And it's talking about what this passage tells you. All right. No, actually, we're going to read it because you need to hear that this is the tribe. So when I say things like Judah is wicked, this is a wicked lineage. I need you to actually hear what I'm saying. So I'm going to read this to you. All right. Judah took a wife for his firstborn. So is the name of his firstborn son. So he gets a wife for his firstborn, his monogenes, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, because we know how important the firstborns are in the lineage, right? Jesus was the monogenes, Jesus is firstborn. So you always have to make those comparisons. The firstborn of this, the firstborn of this, the firstborn of this. We're seeing that all the way through, right? Abraham and Isaac, and, Joseph is even the firstborn of the favorite wife. So we've got this whole firstborn thing, and we haven't even gotten to the firstborn blessings yet, but we know firstborn is a big deal. David was one of the youngest sons, if not the youngest, I don't remember, and he was considered a firstborn. He was called the firstborn of monogenes. So you don't have to physically be the firstborn of all the brothers, but there is a special designation for these firstborns between their true love, between, whatever. We're seeing the importance of the firstborn. So this is Judah's firstborn. He was wicked in the sight of the Lord. And he put him to death. So Judah's offspring is so fucking wicked that God killed him. But we're supposed to believe that this is the wicked bloodline that Jesus comes from. This is why I tell you guys, I've been questioning this. When I learned all this in Bible college, I was like, this cannot be. This cannot be. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. And I can prove it. I can prove it now. All right. Then Judah said to Onan, who's Onan? Let's go back up and see. Oh, this is another son. All right. Go have sex with your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her and raise the offspring for your brother. Now, this sounds, in Judah's defense, this sounds really perverse, right? Because the brother's going to go bang the wife, right? And we look down on that in society today. But in the old days, remember, you have that redeeming kinsman and you're carrying on that bloodline. And the women don't have any way to earn a living or survive in the world. So if, their husband dies, someone has to take care of them. So he's sending the other son to take care of them and keep her alive and keep that bloodline going. Does that make sense? This wasn't a bad thing, even though it looks like a bad thing. This is not what makes Judah wicked. Okay, he's doing the right thing in doing that kinsman right to redeem and take care of the widow. But Onan knew the offspring would not be his. So he didn't want to do the redeeming thing, because when you do the right to redeem, right, even though it's your physical sperm that gets the widow pregnant, the line in the inheritance goes with the other guy, the dead guy's lineage. So any inheritance and land claims and blessings and things that are passed down go to the dead brother. So he would be considered son, not Onan's son. And Onan didn't like this. So whenever he had sex with his brother's wife, he would spread the semen on the ground. So he'd pull out and yank on the ground. He was not sperming in her. So he didn't want to give offspring for the brother. He didn't want to redeem the brother. So he's just banging her, but without redemption. And what he did was wicked in sight of God. So he killed him. Oh, gosh. So he dies too. Because he's being an asshole and he's not following Judah and the law and redeeming the widow. So Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, so there's 2 wicked dead sons in the line of Judah. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law, all right, you're going to have to stay a widow. Like, I can't help you now. So go to your dad's until my youngest son grows up, because he's too young to bang you and redeem you and take care of him. So go be a widow hang at your dad's, wait for my youngest kid to grow up, and then he'll redeem you, and you can marry my youngest son and be brought back into the family, and your line will be redeemed. And he was afraid that his youngest son would die, just like his brothers. So Tamar went and stayed at her father's house. Well, in the course of time, the wife of Judah, she was daughter, died. So now Judah lost his wife. And when Judah was comforted, he needed to be comforted. So he went to Timnah, to his sheep shearers, and he is his friend, with his friend. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to shear his sheep, well, Tamar, right, the girl who was married to all the sons who kept dying, took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up. And she sat at the entrance to this town, which is on the road, for she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. So what's happening is Tamar sees that the youngest, Judah said, when my youngest son grows up, I'll give him to you in marriage, and you don't have to be a widow forever in your father's house and basically be useless and cast aside in society. We will redeem you through my youngest son. But the youngest son grew up, and Judah didn't keep his promise because he was afraid that he would die too. He's like, I'm not giving my son, my third one, to this Tamar lady because he'll end up dead too. So he doesn't let his youngest son marry him. Okay. And Tamar sees this and she gets pissed. So she hides herself, right? So they can't tell who she is. And when Judah saw her, he thought she was a hooker because she had her face covered. He said to her at the roadside, come, let me bang you. Because Judah didn't know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me in order to bang me? And he answered, I'll give you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. And she said, what pledge shall I give you? Says your signet and your cord and your staff that's in your hand. So she's like, I don't trust you that you're going to give me one of these goats that's back on your property. So give me something of yours now that I can hold on to, something personal, so I can keep it as collateral to get your goat later. And he gave them to her and he banged her. And she conceived by him. So now Judah, thinking his daughter-in-law is a hooker, banged her right after his wife died. And now they're having a baby together. This is Judah. This is Judah. I told you, dysfunctional family. She went away. She took off her veil and she put on the garments of her widowhood. So now she's back to being a widow. And Judah sent the young goat to take back to the pledge. So he didn't find her. So he's sending the goat. He's like, thanks for the hot time. Here's your goat. And he says, where is the cult prostitute? The cult prostitute. So not only was Judah banging a hooker for comfort when his wife died, but Judah was banging a cult prostitute, like a temple hooker from one of the false gods. Again, this is the lineage, the tribal characteristics that you are to associate with Jesus, the Messiah. This is the attributes of the bloodline that God set apart to birth the Messiah. This is the one. Okay? He's banging a cult prostitute, or he thinks is a cult prostitute, but really it was his two dead sons, wicked dead sons, widow. All right. And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I can't find her. And the men in the place said, no cult prostitutes are here. Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own, or we'll be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, but you didn't find her. So he doesn't want to be mocked for not paying the cult hooker. And 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. She is pregnant by this immorality. Because as a woman in these times, you can't just go out and bang people. Like, you can't do that. You'll get stoned. Like, you can't do it. And Judah said, not knowing that it's him, bring her out and let her be burned. Burn her at the stake. Fuck her. Fuck that hoe. She's for the streets. And as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, who is Judah. And she said, by the man to whom these belong, I'm pregnant. And she said, please identify who these are, this signet and the cord and the staff. So now she's taking Judah's personal items and holding them out and like, can you tell me who owns these? Because that's the father of the baby. And then Judah identified them and said, oh, this daughter-in-law who disguised herself as a cult temple hooker is more righteous than I. Since I didn't give her to my youngest son, Shelah, because the older two couldn't get it together because they were wicked. And well, good for Judah, he didn't bang her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand. Stop right there. Saying this one is the firstborn. Have you ever seen people in our culture today wearing a scarlet thread around their wrist? Just asking. If you haven't, you've been living under a rock and you need to go ahead and put down the crack pipe and start looking at the celebrities who follow the Kabbalah with their scarlet threads around their wrists and their little magical secret society. And she said, this is the firstborn. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out, and he said, what a breach you've made for yourself. And his name was Perez. And afterwards, his brother came out with a scarlet thread, and his name was called Zerah. So the secondborn put his hand out, and she thought it was the firstborn going to be from the womb. So there's another battle in the womb. Remember we had that battle in the womb last time? Well, there's another battle in the womb with twins. And the second son stuck his hand out of the womb first and put a scarlet thread on because the midwife thought it would be first. But it wasn't. Okay, it wasn't. He drew his hand back and the other twin came out. And she said, what a breach you've made for yourself. And his name was called Perez. And then the brother with the scarlet thread came out next. I wonder if this has anything to do. Never mind. We're not. Of course it does. Okay. Supposedly, Perez, the one who breached, the one who usurped the birthright of the scarlet thread dude, right? The one who ran ahead and got out before the scarlet thread dude. Supposedly, that's the guy that eventually births David, that eventually goes to Jesus. That's the lineage. According to the modern tradition. Does that sound right to you that Jesus comes from this lineage? I don't know. It didn't sound right to me, but you know, we're going to keep going. So now you know a little bit about the character of the tribe of Judah and the lineage that the Messiah is supposedly coming from, the lion of the tribe of Judah. All right. Now, a bunch of shit happens. We're not going to go through it. But Joseph has a lot of drama in Egypt. He's still doing his dreams and visions. He's interpreting dreams in prison. He's doing all this stuff. And eventually, he prophesizes for the Pharaoh. And he gets a really big job with the Pharaoh and becomes the most powerful dude in Egypt, or one of the most influential guys in Egypt. And he saves everybody from a big ass famine. He rises to power. He's using pyramids as his storehouses for grain. And he's got all this grain to get him through a 7-year famine. All right. Now, they're all grown up now. And Joseph's evil brothers go to Egypt. Here's why. When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt from Joseph, who's now really powerful in the Pharaoh's house, he said, "Why do you look at one another? I've heard there's grain for sale in Egypt. Don't stand there with your thumb in your ass. Go and buy grain for us there so we can live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went to get grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin. Remember, Benjamin is the second son from the wife Rachel, and he thinks Joseph's dead. So he's hanging on to Benjamin. He's like, I'm not letting Benjamin go with these fuckers all the way to Egypt. So he didn't send Benjamin with his brothers because he feared that harm might happen to him. You think? And the sons of Israel came among the others who came, for there was famine in the land. Joseph was the governor. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. Now, all you need to know for this, there's a whole bunch of shit that happens, okay? But basically, Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. And a bunch of shit happens, and Joseph's like, tell me about your family. Is your father still alive? Go back to your father and, leave one of the dudes. And I think they left Simeon. He's like, let me hold Simeon hostage to make sure y'all come back. And I think the violent Simeon guy who didn't get any land is the one that Joseph took. And he's like, go back and bring your younger brother that you told me about. Because of course he wants to see his brother. And so Joseph's kind of playing these games with the brothers because they don't recognize him. And they're following orders and doing everything that he says. You can see Joseph is testing his brothers, and he's giving them like a shit ton of things to take home. And, he's hiding things in the sack. There's just a bunch of games that they're playing. Okay. But he provides for his brothers and family in the end. And finally, at the end of all this drama, he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, so the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And he said, I'm Joseph. Is my father still alive? And his brothers couldn't answer. They were dismayed at his presence. So now his vision of everyone bowing down to him is coming true. And Joseph said to his brothers, come near me, please. And they came near, and he said, I'm your brother Joseph that you sold into Egypt. Don't be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me, because God sent me before you to preserve life. So even out of bad things, God will turn it for the good. He's like, if I wasn't here in Egypt, working in the Pharaoh's house with all this fucking grain, all of our asses would be dead in the famine anyway. So no harm, no foul. Don't worry about it. The famine was in the land all these years, blah, 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 blah. All right. And God sent me before you to Egypt to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, to keep you alive. Okay. Now, so that you know, thus says your son Joseph, he says, go back to Jacob, back there in the land, and tell him that your son Joseph said, God made me Lord of all the Egypt, so come to me, don't tarry. I'm going to set you guys up in the land of Goshen, which is an area in Egypt, and you'll be near me, and you and your children and your children's children and all your flocks and your herds and all that you have, bring everybody here, and I will take care of you guys. I'm going to provide you because there's still 5 more years of famine. And of course, he knows this because he's a visionary and a prophet, and he prophesied about that, which is why he stored all the grain, okay, and saved the day. So you're not going to be in poverty. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it's my mouth to see you. Tell my father all my honor in Egypt. Hurry and bring everybody here. And he fell on his brother Benjamin, and he wept, and Benjamin wept, and they all hugged and kissed, and they're reunited. Okay. I will give you the best land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. So the Pharaoh's welcoming his whole family. Now, so you know, while Joseph is in Egypt doing all this stuff with the famine and the grain and getting really powerful and doing his dreams, okay, and he loved Benjamin because Benjamin's his real brother. So he gave him extra. He gave Benjamin extra money and 5 different changes of clothes instead of just 1 change of clothes to the asshole brothers. And, you know, so he's taken a little more care of Benjamin, the little one, his younger actual brother. And while he's doing all this in Egypt and gaining power, Joseph has a wife. So he has presumably he has an Egyptian wife. So now Joseph is of a mixed bloodline. He didn't marry a Hebrew woman. He married a Gentile or a non-Hebrew woman, and they have children of their own. And that is who we are going to meet next. And I'll give you a wild guess as to who the son of Joseph, or one of the sons of Joseph, the Hebrew, and the mixed seed Gentile wife is. Wonder if you know what name that could be. All right, but when he told all this, Jacob, the spirit of Jacob revived, and Israel, or Jacob, said, oh, Joseph, my son is still alive, and I get to see him before I die. So the whole family's happy. The sons are going off to bring their father and their herds and their wives and their kids, and everybody's coming over to Egypt, and the Pharaoh and Joseph are going to set him up. And Joseph has a wife, and he has children of his own. He has a Gentile wife with children of his own. So there you go. So Hebrew has already spread his seed with a non-Hebrew, and that has begun. Because remember, Abraham says you will build many nations. And with that, we're going to take a pause, and I will see you the next time.